Yeah, well, let's throw it open. Yeah.
Well, Mike, we moved again, and we're in Quito, Choco finally. This is our destination, and we're here. And it's a very different place from Medellin or Bogota. It's not as developed. The healthcare system is very bad. 40% of children born here die before they are a year old. Um, can't drink the water, need filters and all of that. But
the lights and Wi-Fi are sporadic.
Yeah, the lights and the Wi-Fi are sort of sporadic, and but we're having a great time. We're here to show people their identity, to help this place transform, and of course, we have begun to walk in our permission of healing the sick, delivering, casting out devils. Haven't raised the dead yet, but close.
Yeah.
And it's really an adventure, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here.
Yeah, it's always encouraging when you step into something. God's opened the door, and I encourage you to make sure you legislate everything from heaven, and so it can be outworked on the earth. I think that's the key.
Yeah, right.
We get to do a lot of things, but we need a heavenly outworking of it to enable us to fully operate in it on earth. And what you establish there can be established on earth. So make sure you establish it in heaven first and get all you need out of any heavenly legislation and authority. And hey, I'm sure lots of people are going to come into their identity and come into their engagement with God themselves. I mean, that's the key, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. Everyone engaging God for themselves and experiencing that reality for themselves. So yeah, awesome. Excellent. Very good. All right.
I have a quick question for you, Mike.
Yep. Okay.
Recently, a friend had been up in court, which is a particular interest of mine. So she was telling me about it. And she said she was taken to the court of the witnesses. And I'd never heard of that one before. And she had been quite frightened to step in, but anytime she goes to a new court, she's always frightened. So she said when she was actually taking somebody else up, it was a child who had been abused, and it appeared to be like a court for the cloud of witnesses. And I wondered if you had ever heard of that before or any experience.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the court of the upright, which is, courts can be called different things in different situations to different people. And then you've got to sort of figure out, okay, is this the same court? Is this an anti-court of that court? For me, the court of the upright is where the cloud of witnesses are, but that's just one gathering. There are other places within that court that different things go on. And so I would suggest that would probably be a courtroom within the court of the upright for specific purposes that some of the cloud of witnesses are engaged to be witnesses of whatever's going on. And I found that also in a lot of the other places, there are ante-rooms or places within places that have different function within the overall. And the key is obviously to go with the experience, and then once you have the experience, go back and re-engage and find out more about it. That's generally the way to go about it. But yeah, I think some courts are just a court, and it's whatever's convened in the court. So, the mobile court or the court of accusation can be convened for many different purposes. So each court could be called something else, but in actual fact, it's the same courtroom, but the proceedings are different. So one courtroom or one courtroom perspective can have many different proceedings that go on in it. And we have civil proceedings, we have obviously in our court system, civil proceedings, you have criminal proceedings. They're all different proceedings in a similar courtroom. And I think that's, the case for that court, in that it's multi-purpose, multifunctioned, and what you convene operates at that level of court. Now, of course, if you're thinking of, okay, let's say more and more people get hold of engaging the courts of heaven, you can't have a whole queue of people waiting to go in there. So it's not like there's only one courtroom. It's like this is a dimension of a court perspective that you could have 1,000 people or 100,000 people, and it would all appear to be this is a separate court. But we're really not talking about in one sense. And of course, the judge can be in all of them at the same time because he's omnipresent and can be anywhere. So in a sense, it's sort of a not thinking of it as in a human earth perspective, but actually seeing it as this is a dimensional place where multiple things can be going on at multiple times, all within that dimension of the kingdom of God. And then in other dimensions, like, for the kingdom of heaven, and heaven itself, where the court of the upright is, then perspectives in there can be multiple things going on with multiple people engaging, not aware necessarily of each other. And I think that's really the way to see a lot of the heavenly realms. They're not really a fixed, rigid one place, but more of a dimensional reality that many people can engage in different ways for different things, really.
Okay, I guessed right then that it was probably in the court of the upright, but
Yeah.
that was, it's always fun getting stretched a little bit and figuring stuff out. And
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And sometimes when you're in a court, within a place, it's like you're focusing on what's going on in that place without necessarily being aware of where that place is in relation to other places. And I think that's, generally speaking, it's the function rather than necessarily exactly where it is or what's going on. So long as you follow the function, then it's okay. But it's useful to be able to say, well, if I need to access that, where do I go to access it again? And knowing sort of some of the geography or, in reality, sort of that gives you some idea. And also at that level of heaven, the function of the government in it is at a higher level than can be outworked in the court of the accusation, or that, which is operating in the kingdom of God realm, which is the lowest realm of the heavens, rather than the one in the middle. So that they really indicate something more of the level of authority and the level of what's going on in different realms. And I think, again, that realm would be a higher realm, and I guess dealing with potentially higher or wider or different things, I suppose. Yeah, very good. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to talk about or question they want to ask?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. May I ask, how is it that you, or what type of things do you do with those who are drug addicted? I know you have a big ministry for drug addicts, and I understand that the courts is not part of it. So I was trying to understand what.
Well, we have basic services which provide for an introduction to people who have any sort of disadvantage, whether it be homelessness or addiction, and we provide basic services in terms of meals and showers and food and clothes and access to computers and various other supportive role.
Mm-hmm.
And those that come to a point where they're wanting to then actually change and change their lifestyle, then we can refer them into our therapeutic community, which is run as a residential therapeutic community. It operates on a farm about 40 minutes from here, in which there is a daily program, and that's run on a peer-based program with the people being in residency, and once they complete the program, which normally takes about 9 months but can longer depending on how well they do, how long they go back and forward in the different stages, because there's the induction stage, then there's first stage, second stage, and then eventually end stage. And in the last 3 months, they are able to come and live in one of our move on accommodations in town, getting them used to the fact that they're going to come back into the community. And then they go into the program every day until they graduate. And when they graduate, then they then stay on in the move on accommodation for as long as they need. And that we move them on into different levels of accommodation based on whether they're going to get into educational training or get back into employment or whatever it requires. So the therapeutic community deals with cognitive behavioral stuff. So it looks at their behaviors, but also why they do what they do, with the purpose of getting underneath at the root causes. So it's a full-on program, but it does have a 75% or more success rate.
Wow.
Where people clean and dry 2 years later. Now that's at work because they really do deal with real issues. There's ministry attached to that. We have meditation groups, engagement groups that go on out there, where people from here go out, and actually one of our guys is actually living out there on site, and he does meditation things, engages them with Jesus. And in actual fact, we had 2 graduations on Sunday, which is always awesome to get the testimonies of what happened before and during and after, and that's really positive in that. But it's not an easy process. I wouldn't say, if someone really wasn't up for change or challenge or transformation, because they confront each other in the sense that someone who's addicted knows when someone else is addicted is trying to, basically get away with anything, or, not really be serious about the program. So they have a process of confrontation in which they, not in a nasty way, but in which they challenge behaviors and encourage people to deal with or recognize why they're behaving the way they are. Now, we obviously we legislate for that being a safe place, a place where they can engage God. When they start to engage God as part of their journey, then they begin to discover that they have a personal and interactive way, and we lead them into that as an encounter rather than prayer or do any of that. So they generally have encounters with God, which then begin to activate their recovery in a more positive way. And the whole program is based on concepts that they do, lots of different concepts during their time that deal with different issues. And some of them are basic concepts to do with forgiveness. Some of them would be to do with relationships. Some of them would be due to thinking, preventing relapse, all sorts of different concepts that they have to come together, do is in a group, and then begin to then outwork that in what they do. And they're challenged, their behavior is challenged, mostly by each other. And the program's run by people who come from an addiction background themselves, so they also know the process. That's really how it works.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, because I was just looking at it from the short end here, which is not that process outside of, since we don't live in your community.
Yeah.
What to do for someone you love who suffers addiction. I know that I've been told courts is not applicable, and that they can go to the, I forget what it's called, the lie busters, but it gets to be kind of, if there's anything else you would recommend.
Yeah, well, the court system will work if someone is willing to participate in it, and you can get a verdict that gives you freedom from mindsets or belief systems or addictions, but you obviously have to apply it, and the application is where it gets difficult. But certainly getting a verdict to be free from something that keeps us in bondage is exactly what the court can do. But generally speaking, if you do that for somebody, they still have to comply and use the verdict. It's better to help them do it, but they've got to be at the right stage in their journey to want to outwork that, because most people go through various attempts at rehabilitation without being serious the first few times. And then eventually they get to a point where they've had enough. So they've hit rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go. They've got a choice. They're probably going to die, you know, or they're going to come out of it. You know, that's ultimately what happens. And so when people get to that point where they really, really do want to change, then at that point, they can then work that change and begin to outwork it. And a group environment helps. Individually, if they have support, I think individuals can come through addiction, but they do need a lot of support both before, during, and after getting to the point where they're able to apply that to it, to the truth to it. Ultimately, the reasons why they're addicted need to be dealt with. And whether that's ministry, you know, releasing toxic emotions, you know, we do all sorts of therapeutic type interventions with people to try and help them. But they have to want to outwork that themselves. And, you know,
would you say that, oh, I'm sorry. Would you say that most of them end up choosing to go to court themselves once they're at the point where they are ready for that, or is that not part of their journey?
Well, those that really continue to pursue a relationship with God will eventually come to a revelation of lots of different things that can help them. Yeah, they need to be able to engage heaven and need to be able to engage to operate the court system. So that's not something everyone can do just because they want to. It's something you've got to learn how to do, and that comes out of a relationship with God. So ultimately, if you have an agenda to be free rather than to know God better and know yourself through the relationship, then once you're free, you know, some people then wouldn't want to pursue relationship. And I think God does not want us to pursue a relationship with him just to deal with our problems. He wants a relationship with us. So that must be the primary thing of when people get to that point where they have to choose how they're going to continue. If they choose the relationship, then the relationship with God will help whatever they do from then on. And people learn different things then, you know, to help them, you know, and we do different types of things in different ways. And sometimes we've done different releasing toxic emotions or, you know, lie busting with people. But we wouldn't generally do that so much when they're in the therapeutic community, because you have to respect the process of the therapeutic community. And then subsequently, then they need the support afterwards. That's probably when we get more involved. A lot of the engagement during the therapy community is just helping them learn to engage heaven, to engage God themselves in a more meditative state of rest that then can be continued. You know, that's how it works for us anyway. But there are lots of other places that do different types of rehabilitation. Friend of ours in the Engaging God program, she's in California. She does a whole, again, residential program for people. And more people are beginning to introduce some of the more mystical elements to that, to give people more of a personal, intimate relationship with God that can help them along their path, you know, as they proceed, really. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Mary.
Just a quick question. When last time we saw you, which was whenever that was, back up in Chattanooga area, you had mentioned that you were going to meet with Arthur Burke. How did
Yeah.
that go? What did you discuss? Did you ask him about ghosts? That's what I primarily want to know, since we touched on that, and that was so different. And that was an aspect that I'd never heard before or even thought before. So I thought, oh, I hope Mike asks him about that. So I'm just curious how that went.
It went really well. I mean, it was sort of a bit of an unexpected thing, but he asked me quite a few questions. He had a like his PA with him who was involved in stuff with him. He asked me quite a few questions. I gave him some of my testimony of engaging heaven, the process of deconstructing my mind in that process, and we dialogued around some of that. And then, you know, I gave him some space for other people to ask him some questions as well. So then people sort of joined in with various questions around it. I didn't specifically ask him about the alien human spirit or lingering human spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. But I know, you know, very clearly that's what he teaches. I was actually talking to Jonathan Cavan yesterday, who is the founder of Liebusters, and he has started to have experience with the same thing. That he's discovered that there seemingly is sometimes the spirit of soul of somebody who lingers, often because of traumatic death, and there was never a death process or whatever, and there's just there's a lingering of them, and then they attach themselves to people, sometimes familiarly. He told me the story of a guy who never really felt that he knew his identity and always felt in some way restricted and limited. And eventually they did a Liebust, and he found that in the reintegration of parts of that Liebust, that he discovered that there were two people he was seeing, and one of them was his twin brother who died in the womb, who never left his mother's womb and attached himself to the other twin. So, you know, and then once they reintegrated that sort of into themselves, if you like, because they were shouldn't be in that person, so they, you know, did whatever they did, then he became free. So I think there is, you know, I think when you start to call them ghosts, obviously that's really associated with all the spooky sort of stuff. Generally speaking, it's like they are attached to people generally, and effectively they are affecting people, that they're alien. They are an alien. They shouldn't be there, and they're not. And I think Arthur Burke now is calling them unclean spirits, not demonic spirits. Because remember, the Bible talks about demons, demonic spirits, but also unclean spirits. And he really is, I think, differentiating that some unclean spirits are the spirits of people who have not passed on any further because of trauma or whatever reason. And those unclean spirits affect others in a negative way. So I have no issue with it. I know, again, some people in the Engaging God program in the UK, who are ministering to a lot of people through that type of ministry. And so they are dealing with those things and dealing with why they're there, helping them come to a place. But they then preach the good news to them, so they go back into a relationship with God rather than anywhere else once they've left the person. And I think Arthur Burke may well be doing that as well, because I think they did get some training with Arthur Burke, I think, you know, before they are doing their stuff in the UK. So yeah, I believe it. I don't say I can prove it because I've not experienced it myself, but I've talked to enough people who have either had those experiences or are ministering to people who are also having to believe that it is valid. And often when they've tried everything and had deliverance over everything, or tried to do everything, and they still feel there's something wrong, something isn't right, they cannot describe it really, but there's something it's just not right about their whole life and there's never been right, then it's often going down that route is sort of has produced success. And then lives change when you deal with something that shouldn't be there in that way. But you have to deal with it differently from deliverance, because it's not a demon that you can cast out. It's the spirit of a person that's been attached for some reason. And then I guess you need to why they're attached. If it's familial, is there a generational attachment to it? And I think deal with it again the same sort of way. You know, find the root, deal with the root, get the legal right removed, and then, you know, help them to become free. But, you know, I would encourage them then to integrate or bring them into a relationship with Jesus, rather than, hey, I'm going to get rid of you as a retributive type of thing. You know, they are a spirit that needs to go somewhere. Well, where are they going to go? Either to be in relationship with God or go into another place where they have to go through a process of being able to come into a relationship with God. So from that perspective, I think, yeah, there's definitely a process to go through. So
do you think that, you know, now hearing you explain that, it sounds to me like, is this possibly what some people who think they've been reincarnated or had past life experiences, is that possibly what maybe is going on? Because sometimes when you know, things that I've read where people talk about, well, I've been something in a past life, it's very accurate. And it would be something that you wouldn't necessarily know intuitively, or even be able to even per se research it necessarily. Is that, do you think maybe that might be explaining why some people think that there is something else going on? Because that's what it is, and it's not really you were somebody, you know, X amount of centuries ago, but it's where something like that has happened.
Well, I think there's two explanations for that. One would definitely be if a human spirit was lingered or was there, they would have their memory of their past experiences. Depends really how long they've been lingering. You know, have they been lingering, died recently, you know, within a family, or as the case I said, you know, the person died as a in the womb, therefore they didn't have any memory before, but then it could be that they died a long time and they've been passed from generation to generation to generation as they die. I mean, that's possible. But then also, if someone did have demonic spirits that were attached, then they would also have the memory of being in other people, depending on where they've been and what they've done. So that memory can also be connected to, I guess. Now, generally, they don't want to be known that they're there. They just want to outwork the influence. So they don't really want to make themselves known particularly. But when they do, or when they're exposed, I would say that particularly if then people start to go into regression therapy or hypnosis or other things, then you're sort of engaging with a memory that is not conscious. And that's why I think people, some of them say, well, because you can't have, 50 people being chief sitting bull or something, or this, sutra, can you? It's like, and sometimes they say they were the same person. But in reality, a demon that was in chief sitting bull could have been in multiple people since, and could have been in multiple people before that. So I think that's where you get the multiple identity things of, well, I've been in multiple lives, because a demon may have been in multiple people and may be able to, and of course they want them to get drawn into that type of belief system, because it draws them away from God ultimately. So I would say potentially there could be both causes. What I don't believe is if someone's soul is going to be reincarnated in another person. Obviously our spirit has been pre-existent, but it wasn't present in anybody else. It just had a pre-existing experience, which can be re-engaged with. But that's very different from, a person dies and then they come back in another body to live out their life again, which is very much sort of the Buddhist view, of reincarnation. in which, you know, you get a chance to go over again. And if you messed up the first time, you could be reincarnated into an animal or an insect or anything else, you know, rather than an ascending experience. It can be a descending experience. Now, I don't know, you know, from that, I mean, how they explain, well, how could someone who descended into the life of a bug or something then end up back into a human later on? I don't know, because it didn't happen, does it? So in reality, I think that is a false teaching, but has some element of truth in that we are pre-existing and do have spiritually rather than in our soul. And I think when a spirit comes into a body, then a person becomes a living soul. They don't have a pre-existing soul. That's my experience. I know other people may teach differently, that the people have well, if you have a pre-existing soul, then I don't understand how that works, because you can't have a soul if you haven't been in somebody else. You know what I mean? The soul is associated with a body. So I don't believe in reincarnation in that way.
Now, does Hinduism also subscribe to reincarnation?
I think it might do. Because of some of the issues with, you know, you don't kill the cows and the sacred cows and all that sort of stuff. Maybe, you know, there may be something to do with it. Personally, I not really know an awful lot about other religions. You know, I was
just wondering if that was the case. If that was the case, did any of that come up to a degree when you were, you know, teaching there? Because of course you're not going to be going down any kind of a reincarnation pathway. And for anyone who was into Hinduism, you know, did any of that come up in terms of what they deal with over there?
No, not really. I mean, I think some of the people that I engaged with were Hindus. Some of them have come from generations of Christians, you know. So in a sense, there was a mixture of people there. I didn't really teach there on any of those issues, but they did come up in the Q&A, you know, and I didn't promote them coming up in the Q&A. They just came up and you have to deal with whatever comes up in the Q&A. So I did have to deal with, you know, questions about what happens to people after they die. Is it hell, and the whole concept of, you know, punishment, and is it? So I did deal with all that. Now, for some, obviously that was a challenge. Most, it was a relief, I guess. I think challenging more the use of the Bible as the mediator between God and people was a bigger religious stumbling block for some of the pastors there. And of course, challenging the top-down hierarchical covering structures of government, that obviously is definitely offended a few. You know, so I was aware that it was likely to, because there is still a very Pentecostally type, you know. I mean, I met one guy on the Sunday, and, you know, I was just having a walk in the sunshine, and I bumped into him and his family and whatever coming out of their church service, which was held on the campus that we were on. And, you know, he was very, very smartly dressed and blah, 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 and, you know, sort of introduced himself and, oh yeah, we're going to come to your meeting, blah, blah. So then he sort of at pains was to express, you know, how he had graduated from the Rhema school of this, that, and the other. And I thought, oh my word of faith, you may well struggle somewhat when we start going into how an ecclesia establishes under a foundational government and not a covering. And that's exactly what happened. So he encouraged all his congregation to come. Some of them came, and then after a couple of days, he was like, you know, texting them, telling them that they shouldn't come anymore, and he was so sorry for calling them to come. And I also went in the, you know, the you know, New Testament, New Covenant version of giving was not tithing. So that also, you know, I was in the country to slay a number of sacred cows, obviously. And so we did have barbecued sacred cow a lot. And some people didn't get on with that too much, but the majority, I would say, you know, 98% of the people there embraced it. And some of them were progressively more progressive in their thinking and understanding than a lot of Western people that I've met. And they had concepts of, you know, no titles and you know, and I had some very good conversations with them. And I was surprised at how mature some of them were in some of these things. Yeah, because I didn't know what to expect, you know. I created an environment which is a safe place for people, and people engaged, and it was great, you know. And they did have some very good questions, but also I think they were very hungry and open, and it was a great atmosphere to be able to talk and share in, you know, very positive. But nothing really about reincarnation came up, but quite a bit about what happens to people after they die and that sort of stuff, you know. Okay. And a lot of eschatology questions, you know, which inevitably come up when you start challenging some of the present views that we might have about what's going to happen, you know. And the evangelical perspectives, you know, have created fear, you know. And if you're promoting this, hey, we've got a better future, the kingdom of God is going to fill the earth, you know, we're going to see the glory of God fill the earth, we're going to see the restoration of all things, you know, that's part of our remit to establish embassies of heaven on earth. And of course that's going to challenge somewhat the doom, gloom, pessimistic, we're going to be rescued having failed in our job. So, you know, in the end, I did do a whole full session of teaching on eschatology because they had a lot of issues over it, because they live in fear. And, you know, a lot of people live in fear because they're afraid of what's going to happen and all of this. So again, they receive that very well, because it is one of those things that can completely remove any sense of authority if you believe you're going to fail and we're going to be raptured and rescued out of it, rather than succeed, see the kingdom of God come in at ever increasing dimensions until it fills the earth. So, you know, you do have a very different perspective when your eschatology is one which is much more realized and happy, rather than, you know, pessimistic and very heavily judgmental in doom and gloom and punishment coming, you know.
Well, it's interesting now, just going on to a totally different subject, but this time last year we were going through what we generally refer to as the cop classes with the local sheriff and learning all of that. Right now, we've just gone into what's called CERT training, which is Community Emergency Response Training. And this actually teaches people in the community how to be not a true first responder, but a lot of times if something happens in your neighborhood, you're there before the first responders ever get, and how to handle basic situations, how to do basic search and rescue, how to put things together. And so this is going to be learning another whole aspect of how, even learning how a lot of the community works, because it seems like my prayer focus really seems to be right now my local county for whatever reason, and that's fine. And so for me, this is an opportunity to not only learn about the county, but it's where you, if you choose to, you can go through ongoing training and you wind up getting certified that if something happens, they will even call you in to come in and help and assist if something really huge happens, or if there's something like right in your neighborhood. Since you're there, you can begin to get things ready so that when first responders get there, you can tell them basically what's going on, what you've discovered. So it's really interesting to learn another aspect of how this part of the community works. Because I mean, we got it from the sheriff's department. Now this is fire, rescue, disaster, the whole 9 yards, to see how that's coordinated, but also to know how to pray into effect that first, that they don't need to be used, but then if they do, that it works properly and efficiently and quickly. So it's going to be just another whole thing about learning about my county, and I think getting a whole new insight into how to pray and legislate over the county.
Absolutely. And I think if that's where people's mandates are, it's nothing wrong with getting as much information and engagement with the very practical things, rather than just being very theoretical and oh, well, I'm praying for my county. Well, what are you praying? Do you have any idea of what to pray? And actually, when we think of praying, what are we talking about? You know, because we're not talking about, oh God, will you help my county? You know, we're sort of saying, hey, I'm in a position, I've got a mandate for my county, whatever it might be, and I'm going to use that mandate to legislate governmentally for the prosperity and blessing and protection and all the other things that would see God's heart for that county at work, and then to legislate into the very specific things that you come up with. You know, if your county's got a drug issue, okay, why? What's caused it? What are the roots? Court cases to therefore legislate into the legal rights that, let's say there's trafficking in certain areas. You know, if you don't know what's there, and you can say, oh, well, I'm going to ask God. Yeah, and he will tell you, but there's nothing wrong in getting involved in finding real people and getting to see real people's lives. And then you've got a real insight into practically how can we see the kingdom of God, give them a way of engaging them, which brings God's kingdom into their lives and through their lives. Because, you know, God doesn't just work through people that say they're believers. You know, he's at work through everybody to demonstrate his love and light, even if they don't know it. You know, so if someone's a policeman or someone's a fire thing, is God going to use that person to bring blessing or to protect, or what? Of course he is. You know, and they may be fulfilling a purpose of God without even knowing it. And the more we can connect to them to, hey, you know, God cares for people. He doesn't want to see people burnt. As much as we've told them he's going to burn people, he really doesn't want to see people burnt or any other thing like that. You know, we can use that even in that way to interact with people and open up their eyes to a different version of God than probably they thought, you know, by presenting who God really is as a God of love and of that in a different way. So, you know, I'm all for community involvement, but ensuring that you do it in the area that you're called to do it. And that's different for everybody. And it isn't a carte blanche where we can just go and interfere with everything just because we think we should, or that we've got a right to fix every problem just because there is one. You know, we need a clear mandate, which you have, and therefore you're out working with authority that someone else wouldn't have if they didn't have that mandate. But there may be others who are more interested in the educational system or other areas of the community, that different mandates apply to different areas. And we need to just make sure that we're operating in our own and not trying to actually fix every problem that exists. Because a lot of people try and they end up getting burnt out because they're going to run on their own strength, and that doesn't take you very far in that way. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds great. You know, you get more things, and the more insight you have into the reality of people's lives and what's going on in the community, the easier it is to legislate for God's kingdom to come and bring change and transformation to what's going on and to help people in their everyday lives.
And this program, it's I see it like a double benefit. It's not only giving me understanding and I believe greater accuracy in prayer, but it also trains us on the practical aspect of, if you see it happens and you're the only one there, this is what you do. And that may make a difference. That may save a person's life. So to me, it's like a melding of the practical aspect of when you're dealing with things, along with the spiritual aspect of.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think God does want us to be prepared to be able to do whatever we need to do. I saw a film when I was coming back from India on the plane. I watched a film called Breakthrough, and I mean it's a true story of a kid who was adopted from Guatemala or something by this couple, and he was into ice hockey. Was he into basketball? And he fell through the ice and basically died, effectively, for all intents and purposes. And the first responders were there, and this guy was just about to give up because they had this big pole and they were trying to fight, and they would basically give up. And he heard a voice that he thought was his commander saying, "Go back." And so he went back and immediately found this guy, pulled him up. He'd been under the water 15 minutes or more. They got him out, and he goes to hospital. he had, and they obviously did the CPR, get the water, and then he goes to hospital, and basically for another 45 minutes, no pulse, nothing. So they keep doing CPR, and they're about to give up, but they basically say, well, the mother comes, she's a believer. So she goes into the room, they all stop the CPR, and she basically says, dear God, you need to save my son. You need to revive him. So she calls the Holy Spirit to come, and the pulse starts. I mean, and this is sort of true story. So, you can see how in that affected that first responder was an atheist and did not believe in God. But then goes to his thing and said, well, who told me to go back? And they're all like, no one. So he was like, well, I heard a voice, So it was a great story. I mean, I was on the plane. I mean, I was in floods of tears. People must have wondered what I was watching, but I was like, because it was because the whole community gathered, the church gathered, sort of. It was a very positive, and it was a miraculous recovery. This guy was told, but his mother did not give up, and she just refused to be negative. And so, and she pushed and started, obviously declaring really life over him, and stopped anyone declaring death over him. And she took the doctors to task. She took everyone to task. She would not allow negativity around him. And, as a result, he was totally restored. It was just like totally miraculously restored. And the doctors were, this is impossible, because, he had infection in every part of his body. They were good. And she said, okay, turn the life support off. Well, they turned it off, and he braved on his own. So it was just like awesome testimony. But again, shows how God can use people in different situations to save that person. And even that then can actually affect that person's life themselves, because he ended up in the church they were in. They ended up with sort of an interview with the family, and they invited everyone who'd been involved, from all the school children who all got together to pray. They had candlelight vigils. They sang, what was the song they sang? I call you upon the waters. I mean, all this stuff. I mean, it was just awesome, and they called all the responders, the paramedics, the hospital staff. They all came to celebrate the testimony of the miraculous recovery of this little boy. Well, he was a teenager. And of course, that also dealt with the fact that he'd always felt rejected because he'd been adopted and his parents didn't want him. And that showed how special he was to God, because God saved him when no one else could have done. So it was an awesome story all the way around, to be honest. But it shows the importance of what can happen when people are moved by God, and are, even if they don't even know they are going to be. And this was very clearly the truth. The guy didn't even believe in a God, ended up in the church, totally having to acknowledge that he was part of a miracle. So awesome, really. So
One of our first encounters, Mike, one of our first encounters with someone from Choco was when their daughter, newborn baby, was airlifted up to the Rio Negro area to get better health care. The baby was very sick. And the pastor here called us because the child was in our area. We went to the hospital. Well, they would. Are we?
Autumn, are you? I think so.
Can you hear us?
yeah, can hear you. Yeah, can hear
Yours?
you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
One of our first encounters was with a baby who was very ill, who had been airlifted from this area up to Rio Negro, where we used to live. And we went to the hospital, and they weren't going to let us in to see the baby. The parents were on the 3rd floor, the baby was on the 4th floor. We went down to speak to the parents, and then all together we went up to the 4th floor. And just miraculously, as we got off the elevator, they were wheeling the baby out of a room that was right there by the elevator. And James and I just went right into action. We didn't answer any questions. We went right over to the gurney, and both of us had our hands on the baby and prayed for the baby out there in the hallway. And this child recovered, had some serious liver issues and jaundice and other things. But the miracle is that we were able to meet this child when they were telling us that we could not see the child, couldn't do anything. But once they came out to that hallway and we stepped off the elevator right there together where they were, we just put our hands right on there, and everything, things changed immediately. We got reports that night that the test had come back normal and things of that nature. So I think when you don't give up, like you said, and you just keep pressing, believing, what God has put you there for, and it works. It just works.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely works. I mean, I have a testimony of that with my own grandson. Next week I'm taking my grandchildren away for the week to a sort of residential sporting craft place, having some fun with them. But my grandson is 7. When he was 1, he had basically had encephalopathy, which basically was infection in the brain, and he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, he was effectively in a coma, and I went up to the hospital and basically picked him up and took him into heaven with me. So I took his spirit into the realms of heaven. I held his body, and they brought him out of the coma. Lots of people were obviously praying for him and other things. They brought him out of the coma, and initially he couldn't see or couldn't hear and was just totally floppy. But within hours, he was seeing and hearing, and they basically sort of prepared my daughter for, okay, you need to be prepared. He could be permanently damaged. He's here, and he's perfectly healthy, 7-year-old. No issues whatsoever in that way. And sometimes, yeah, you do get an opportunity of intervening in a situation that you do what you can do and don't give up. And for some people, his mother didn't know anything about engaging heaven, but she certainly knew that she was not going to give up on her son. And she called, and even though he was adopted, for her, this was her son. And so but it also dealt with something in her, because then it uncovered that what had happened to her in her past, and then that enabled God to meet her in that. So in these things, so many things happen, that sometimes we're only aware of one thing, but there's multiple things happening in the same scenario to multiple people, because God's at work in it, And I think being at work in it is when we just cooperate with him in what he's doing, but never give up, never give up, believing what God can do. Nothing's impossible with God. I think, this is what Jesus really came to say. Hey, look, nothing's impossible with God. All things are possible. Therefore, the more we begin to engage relationally with God, the more things become possible for us. And the limitations and restrictions that religion has placed on us come off, and we suddenly start to see what we can do and what's possible to bring change, transformation, not just to individuals, but communities. And I'm sure you guys down there, you are going to bring transformation to your community. You're going to see it transformed in ways right now probably you don't necessarily fully see, but more and more it will get revealed, and more you'll get to outwork it. And it's God's desire for all of us to be both individually free, but then to begin to engage with the areas of creation that we're responsible for, to see them come into freedom, whether that be small, big, large, whatever it is. We've all got a role to play in it. Creation is waiting, longing for the revealing of the sons of God. And we're all sons of God, and we all have different roles to play in bringing the restoration of creation about. So it's pretty exciting, really, to be involved in all sorts of different levels and layers of that, and realize that there are many multiple layers and levels of things that God is doing, and he's using us in different aspects of them, but all really to bring about the restoration back to his original intention and purpose, which will be very interesting to see, as we go forward, how that gets that work. But we've got to have people who are willing to do it on earth as it is in heaven. We can't just be doing heavenly stuff. It's got to be on the ground, changing people's lives in reality. Otherwise, it's just theoretical. And I know heavenly preparation needs to take place, but there's got to be earthly outworking in reality. Otherwise, nothing's really going to change unless things really do change. And it only really changes when people change. And then things can change out of people's change. We're never going to change a community without changing the people in the community. And it's actually the people in the community who will change the community, because they will think differently, act differently, respond differently. Things will change because people now are actually responding out of their relationship with God and not out of anything else. So yeah, we've got to start to see more things happening on earth as in heaven, and we've got to see more people willing to take the thing of stepping out and doing it. Because I see a lot of people willing to engage heaven, but not so many people willing to establish something out of heaven onto the earth. It's like, I'm not really sure I want to do that, because it's hard. It's not easy. And I fully understand how hard it is, having sought to do it over the last 10 years, and see really how difficult it is to change and transform something. And even when you start something from the foundations from scratch, you still have all the people's mindsets that came in from something before. So much easier to start with people who haven't got no religious background, and then see more and more people added who've got no religious background. Then you don't have so much baggage. But of course, they got their own baggage and their own background, so they still have to deal with all that. So transformation has to be, the essence of what we're doing to see things change and transformed in that way. But it's pretty awesome to see it happening, to see it come around happening. So it's great. Excellent. All right. Okay. Any more questions or anything anyone wants to ask before we finish?
What is the name of that movie you were watching, Mike, that you saw the miracle? And
the movie was called Breakthrough.
Breakthrough?
Breakthrough, yeah. And who was in it? Topher Grace, I think, was in it. He was playing the pastor of the church who was involved. But it was a good movie. And they didn't cut the Christian stuff out of it. It was very full of, I think, who was the guy playing the worship? Phil Wickham, I think, was playing the worship in the church in the movie. So they drawn people in. So, but it was great. It was good. It was a very, very real sort of thing, but true. So when it's a true story, and they showed the pictures of the real people, at the end of it and all that. So, for me, that's
great.
Yeah, and there were some good actors in it. Mike Cotter was in it. He was the fireman. He's the guy who played in one of the Marvel series. He played Luke Cage. So there's some good actors in it. It wasn't low production values. It was good and very good story.
Well, that's great.
Mike, a while ago, you sent out an email requesting us to sign up for another group, and I cannot find that email anywhere. I think I deleted it by mistake. If you could send that again to us.
Okay. These groups will continue because these are public groups. That was probably to do with the Engaging God groups, which, I'm going to restart those in January with new people in terms of beginners groups and advanced groups. I'm just asking everyone to sign up They want to be in a beginners group or an advanced group, and that's for everyone who's been in previous Engaging God groups to say, do I want to continue in? Because some things, it's like some groups have got 20 people in them, and like hardly anyone ever turns up. So I want to give new people an opportunity, and then the people in the existing groups can join the advanced groups if they want to, but I do want them to turn up and not just say they're going to turn up and not turn up, because there's pointless doing that. So that was the opportunity of it. So it's really only for the Engaging God program groups, rather than these ones. These will carry on as they are.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, nice seeing you again after a while, and I'll catch up with you next time.
Okay,
you,
thanks,
Mike.
Mike.